In the far reaches of the Andromedos galaxy, beyond the sight of even Earth's most powerful telescopes, the Valkyra homeworld gleamed like a jewel among the stars. This planet, named Thaldor, was the heart of a sprawling empire ruled by an ancient race of warrior women. These women were known as the Valkyra, towering figures of strength and discipline, bred for battle and conquest. Their society was built upon the core principles of honor, war, and dominance. For centuries, they had expanded their territory, conquering planets, solar systems, and even whole star clusters. Few races dared to challenge them. At the head of this mighty empire was General Arina, a fearsome leader whose name was whispered with awe across the galaxy. With her flowing silver hair, piercing violet eyes, and skin the color of the deep ocean, she was a commanding presence, her battle record spotless. Arina had led the Valkyra through countless victories, and her name was synonymous with invincibility. But now, the Valkyra were bored. They had defeated every major opponent in their sector, leaving them with no worthy adversaries. It was in this boredom that Arina had agreed to a peculiar mission, a reconnaissance trip to an insignificant planet on the fringes of their maps, Earth. Earth, Arina said, sitting in her command chair aboard the sleek silver battlecruiser Valoria. What a pitiful little rock. Indeed, General, Sora, her second-in-command, replied with a smirk. Sora was nearly as tall as Arina, her frame wrapped in gleaming black armor. It barely registers as a threat. Their technology is primitive, their defenses laughable. They're no more advanced than the lizards we wiped out on Chloros 4. Arina glanced at the holographic map displaying Earth and its neighboring planets. To her, it was just a speck, a small blue dot floating in the vastness of space. She knew Earth's history, a planet torn by wars and conflict, populated by a species that had barely managed to escape their atmosphere in flimsy metal capsules. Compared to the Valkyra, who had mastered faster-than-light travel eons ago, humans were little more than children playing with toys. They call their kind humans, Arina mused aloud, her tone dripping with amusement. They sound so fragile, so insignificant. How they've managed to survive this long in the cosmos is beyond my understanding. The other Valkyra on the bridge chuckled in agreement. They had been monitoring Earth's communications, its broadcasts and signals. They found the humans' obsession with entertainment, material wealth, and trivial conflicts laughable. The Valkyra, in contrast, lived for the thrill of battle and the pursuit of victory. Arina rose from her chair, her violet eyes gleaming. We shall pay them a visit. They may not be worthy of our conquest, but it will be amusing to see their faces when they realize just how small they are in the grand scheme of the universe. With a simple hand gesture, Arina commanded the Valoria to descend. The ship hummed to life, its engines glowing as it accelerated toward Earth. The vessel was a thing of beauty and terror, a sleek war machine equipped with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. It shimmered as it cut through the void, its cloaking field allowing it to pass undetected through Earth's defense systems. As the ship neared the outer atmosphere, the crew gathered on the bridge, eagerly awaiting their first glimpse of this primitive world. A holographic view of Earth appeared before them, a swirl of blue oceans, green land masses, and white clouds. They are so unaware, Sora sneered, her arms folded across her chest. We could destroy them all before they even knew we were here. Arina, however, wasn't interested in destruction. Not yet, at least. Let them see us first. Let them feel the weight of our presence. The Valoria pierced through the atmosphere, its cloaking field shimmering and dropping away as it descended toward Earth. The ship sliced through the sky like a falling star, its sleek metallic body gleaming in the sunlight. The Valkyra watched with amusement as Earth's primitive radar systems began to pick up their presence. Alarms blared across military bases, and jets were scrambled to intercept. They think their machines can stop us? Sora laughed. How quaint. Within minutes, the Valoria hovered above one of Earth's largest cities, New York. Its enormous shadow blotted out the sun, casting the city below into a state of confusion and panic. The ship's engines emitted a low, humming vibration that rattled windows and shook buildings. On the streets, people looked up in horror and awe. Thousands gathered, staring at the colossal spacecraft that had suddenly appeared above their heads. Some ran, terrified of the unknown. Others stood frozen, unable to comprehend the sight before them. Arina stood at the front of the ship, her gaze fixed on the tiny figures below. The humans were as small and insignificant as she had imagined, scurrying about like ants under her feet. She found it almost humorous. "Open the bay doors," Arina commanded, her voice calm. The enormous bay doors at the bottom of the ship slowly slid open with a hiss, and a ramp extended to the ground below. Arina, Sora, and several of the elite Valkyra warriors marched down the ramp, their massive forms and shining armor creating an imposing spectacle. They moved with grace and power, every step purposeful, their eyes cold and calculating. As they reached the street, the crowd backed away, whispering in fear. The humans had never seen anything like the Valkyra before, these tall, blue-skinned warriors with eyes that glowed like stars. For a moment, there was only silence, the air thick with tension. Then Arina spoke, her voice booming through the city. "People of Earth, we are the Valkyra, conquerors of the stars. We have come to witness your world, though it is barely worth our attention. Look upon us, and know that you are nothing in the grand scheme of the universe." Her words echoed through the streets, causing murmurs of fear and confusion to ripple through the crowd. The Valkyra warriors smirked, enjoying the humans' terrified reactions. "They are so fragile," Sora whispered, her eyes scanning the crowd. "So pathetic." But as Arina surveyed the humans, her gaze was drawn to something unexpected, a figure standing still amidst the chaos. A man, unlike the others, was watching them with a calm, almost defiant look in his eyes. He didn't run or cower like the others. Instead, he stood tall, his eyes locked on hers. "Interesting," Arina muttered, her curiosity piqued. This human was different. Perhaps Earth was not as pathetic as she had thought. The streets of New York were gripped by chaos. People screamed and scattered as the enormous Valkyra battlecruiser Valoria loomed overhead like a harbinger of doom. Helicopters circled cautiously, and the roar of military jets could be heard in the distance, but they all seemed insignificant against the vast size and power of the alien ship. Sirens blared throughout the city as police forces and emergency responders struggled to maintain order, their efforts futile against the overwhelming presence of the Valkyra warriors. General Arina, her glowing violet eyes surveying the scene, stood at the base of the ramp, flanked by her elite guard. Their armor gleamed under the sunlight, making them look like invincible gods descended from the heavens. The humans kept their distance, but a thick tension filled the air, and the expressions of terror painted across the crowd fed the Valkyra's amusement. "Look at them," Sora said, a grin spreading across her face. "Scurrying around like insects. They know nothing of war, of strength." Arina nodded. The humans' feeble attempts to react, to mount some sort of defense, were laughable. She raised her hand, signaling the Valkyra to spread out. They moved through the streets, towering over the panicked civilians, examining Earth's inhabitants like curious animals. The Valkyra didn't care for plundering or violence. They had already deemed Earth too insignificant for full conquest. This was purely a demonstration of their superiority, a lesson to remind these lesser beings of their place in the galaxy. One of the Valkyra warriors, a fierce fighter named Kara, grabbed a nearby streetlight and bent it with one hand, displaying her raw strength. The humans gasped, their fear evident, as Kara tossed the mangled metal aside. "Pathetic," she muttered, brushing past the crowd. Yet as the Valkyra spread out, mocking the humans and showing off their might, Arina couldn't shake the strange feeling she'd had earlier, the sensation that not all of these Earthlings were as weak and terrified as they seemed. Her gaze swept over the crowd again, and there he was, the same man who had caught her attention before. He stood apart from the others, calm amidst the panic. He was tall for a human, maybe 6 feet, with a muscular build and sharp features. His dark hair was cropped close, and he wore a casual jacket, as if he hadn't expected to witness the arrival of an alien invasion that day. Despite the terror in the air, his expression was steady, even curious. He watched Arina and her soldiers with a boldness that no other human dared. Arina narrowed her eyes, intrigued. Who is this man? She strode forward, cutting through the crowd with Sora by her side. As they approached, the humans instinctively moved back, creating a wide circle around the Valkyra and the mysterious man who now stood in their center. For a brief moment, the city fell silent, the weight of the encounter palpable. "You," Arena called out, her voice echoing down the empty streets. "What is your name, Earthling?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "David Kane," he said, his voice firm but calm. Arena studied him for a moment, intrigued by his composure. He was different from the others, and there was something about him that stirred a strange sense of curiosity in her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in ages. Most beings cowered in her presence, but this one, he seemed almost amused. "You seem remarkably calm for someone standing before the most powerful warrior race in the galaxy," Arena said, folding her arms across her chest. "Do you not fear us?" David shrugged casually, as though he were discussing the weather. "I've seen a lot in my time. Fear doesn't change anything." Sora stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "You speak too boldly for a man whose people are at our mercy," she growled. "Show respect before we show you how truly insignificant you are." David's lips quirked into a slight smile. Respect is earned, not demanded. The crowd, still watching from a safe distance, gasped at his words. The Valkyra were renowned for their ruthlessness, and no one expected a human, especially an ordinary one, to talk back to them. Yet David seemed unfazed by the towering warriors before him, and his words carried a weight that unsettled Arena, if only slightly. "You dare to challenge us?" Arena asked, her voice cold but edged with curiosity. "Do you not realize what we could do to your world?" "I realize it," David said, his voice unwavering. "But I also know that strength isn't just about size or power. It's about will. I've faced enemies before, and I've learned one thing. If you don't stand your ground, you've already lost." Arena was silent for a moment, considering his words. There was something undeniably different about him. He was no ordinary human. There was strength in his stance, a quiet confidence that resonated with her on a deeper level. She had never met a being from such a primitive world who displayed such fearlessness in the face of overwhelming odds. Sora, however, was less impressed. "Shall we crush him, General?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Show these Earthlings what happens when they forget their place?" But Arena shook her head, raising her hand to stop Sora. "No, he interests me." Sora blinked, surprised. "This Earthling, he is nothing." Arena's gaze remained locked on David, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Perhaps. But I want to see what this one is capable of." The crowd murmured, confused by Arena's unexpected interest. David remained calm, but even he could sense the shifting dynamics in the air. The tension was no longer purely about fear or domination. Arena wasn't just mocking him, she was testing him. She stepped closer, her imposing figure towering over him. "Tell me, David Kane," she said slowly, her voice lowering to a more personal tone. "Why should I not simply take your world and leave it in ruins?" David held her gaze. "Because it's not as weak as you think." Sora scoffed, but Arena raised her hand again, silencing her. She studied David for a long moment, and then, in an unexpected move, she extended her arm toward him, offering him a challenge. "Prove it," she said. David glanced at her hand, then back into her glowing violet eyes. He could feel the eyes of every Valkyra and human on the street watching, waiting to see what he would do. The odds were stacked against him, and yet he wasn't afraid. There was something in Arena's eyes, a spark of mutual respect that hinted at possibilities he hadn't expected. He reached out and took her hand. In that moment, something shifted. The balance of power between the Valkyra and Earth was no longer a simple game of domination. Arena had found a human who intrigued her, one who had the potential to challenge her preconceptions. As she released David's hand, she turned to Sora and her soldiers. "Hold your positions," she commanded. "We'll see if this planet is truly as weak as we thought." And with that, the Valkyra, who had arrived with mockery in their hearts, now found themselves on the verge of something far more complex. An encounter that would forever change the way they saw Earth and its people. The atmosphere was electric. The heart of New York City had transformed into an arena of anticipation. Skyscrapers towered like silent spectators over the streets below, where a circle had formed around General Arena and David Kane. The crowd, a mix of fear and awe, watched as the imposing Valkyra leader faced off against the unassuming earthling who had dared to stand his ground. Arena's violet eyes assessed David with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "You possess courage unusual for your species," she remarked, her voice resonating with both admiration and condescension. "But courage without strength is meaningless." David met her gaze steadily. "Strength comes in many forms," he replied. "It's not just about physical power." Sora, observing from the sidelines, clenched her fists. "General, this is a waste of time. Let me dispatch him and remind these humans of their place." Arena raised a hand to silence her. "No, Sora. This one has piqued my interest. I will handle this myself." The Valkyra warriors formed a perimeter, their towering forms creating an imposing barrier between the duelists and the crowd. Military personnel who had arrived on the scene held their positions, unsure of how to proceed. Orders crackled over radios, but no one dared to interfere. Arena stepped forward, the ground seeming to tremble under her weight. She wore armor made of an iridescent material unknown to Earth, which moved like liquid silver yet was as strong as any metal known to man. At her side hung an energy blade, its hilt adorned with intricate alien symbols. "Do you wish to reconsider?" Arena asked, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Yield now, and I may spare you the humiliation." David shook his head. "I've never backed down from a challenge." He was unarmed, but years of training had honed his body into a weapon. As a former Special Forces operative, David had faced enemies of all kinds. But this was different. He was up against an alien warrior with abilities beyond human comprehension. Still, he felt a strange calm settle over him. Arena drew her energy blade. The weapon ignited with a sharp hiss, a shimmering blade of pure energy extending from the hilt. Its light cast a glow over her face, highlighting her determined expression. "Very well," she said. "Let us begin." Without warning, Arena surged forward. Her movements were a blur, faster than any human could naturally perceive. Yet David reacted instinctively, years of combat experience guiding him. He sidestepped her initial strike, the energy blade slicing through the air where he had stood moments before. The crowd gasped. Cameras from news crews captured the astonishing scene, broadcasting it live around the world. People watched from their homes, bars, and public squares, eyes glued to screens as the impossible unfolded before them. Arena spun gracefully, bringing her blade around in a sweeping arc. David ducked, feeling the heat of the blade as it passed overhead. He retaliated with a swift kick, aimed at her midsection. His foot connected with her armor, the impact jarring but ineffective. She raised an eyebrow. "Impressive reflexes," she admitted. "But you'll need more than that." Arena intensified her assault, launching a series of rapid strikes. David evaded each one with a combination of agility and anticipation. He noticed that while she was incredibly fast and strong, her fighting style was direct, perhaps overconfident. As the duel continued, David began to adapt. He looked for patterns in her movements, timing in her attacks. He realized that if he could predict her next move, he might find an opening. Arena feinted to the left before swinging to the right. David anticipated the maneuver, stepping inside her guard. Seizing the moment, he delivered a powerful elbow strike to her shoulder joint, aiming for a gap in her armor. The impact made Arena stumble back a step. Surprise flashed across her face. No one had ever managed to land a blow on her in close combat, let alone a human. "You're full of surprises," she remarked, her tone tinged with genuine respect. "Likewise," David replied, breathing steadily. Around them, the Valkyra warriors exchanged uncertain glances. Sora's expression darkened. "General, this has gone on long enough," she called out. "Allow me to assist." Arena shot her a sharp look. "Stand down, Sora. This is my fight." Resuming her focus on David, Arena adjusted her stance. She recognized that brute force would not suffice. This human required a different approach. She deactivated her energy blade, much to everyone's astonishment. "A fair fight," she declared, setting the hilt aside. "No weapons." David nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Agreed." They circled each other, each assessing the other's weaknesses. Arena made the first move, launching a swift kick aimed at David's torso. He blocked it with his forearm, the force sending a shockwave up his arm. He countered with a jab toward her midsection, which she parried effortlessly. The exchange intensified. They moved like dancers, each motion fluid and precise. Arena's strength was undeniable, but David's adaptability kept him in the fight. He leveraged his smaller size to his advantage, slipping under her strikes and targeting vulnerable spots. Minutes felt like hours as the duel wore on. Sweat beaded on David's brow, but he maintained his composure. Arena, too, showed signs of exertion. A sheen on her skin, a slight quickening of her breath. "You're holding back," David said between exchanges. "Perhaps," she admitted. "But so are you." He smiled. "Maybe we're both looking for the same thing." She paused, momentarily lowering her guard. "And what is that?" "Understanding." Arena regarded him thoughtfully. "You fight not just with your body, but with your mind. It's rare." Before she could continue, David seized the opportunity. He moved swiftly, closing the distance between them. He executed a sweep kick aimed at her legs. Caught off guard, Arena stumbled, losing her balance. She recovered quickly but found David's fist stopping inches from her face. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The Valkyra warriors tensed, unsure of how to react. David withdrew his hand, stepping back to give her space. "Yield?" he asked softly. Arena's eyes widened, not in anger but in something resembling admiration. She let out a soft laugh. "No one has ever brought me to a standstill," she confessed. "First time for everything," he replied. She straightened, a newfound respect evident in her gaze. "You are a remarkable warrior, David Kane. Your species may be more than we anticipated." Sora approached cautiously. "General, this is highly irregular. We cannot—" Arena silenced her with a glance. "Enough, Sora. This duel has served its purpose." Turning back to David, she extended her hand, a universal gesture of respect. "You have earned my acknowledgement." He accepted her hand, their grips firm. "And you have mine." The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a sense of mutual recognition. The crowd began to cheer, the sound growing louder as the realization of what had transpired sank in. Around the world, viewers celebrated the unexpected outcome, a human standing as an equal with an alien warrior. Arena released his hand and addressed both the Valkyra and the humans present. "Today we have learned that strength is not solely measured by might, but also by spirit and resolve. We came here believing you were weak, but we see now that you possess qualities worthy of respect." Sora looked conflicted but ultimately deferred to her general's judgment. The other Valkyra murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement. David took a step forward. "Perhaps there's more we can learn from each other." Arena considered his words. "Perhaps. There is much about your world that intrigues me." At that moment, a high-ranking military officer stepped forward from the human side. "On behalf of Earth, we extend an invitation for diplomatic relations," he said cautiously. Arena glanced at David, then back at the officer. "Diplomacy was not our initial intent," she admitted, "but circumstances have changed." Sora interjected. "General, our protocols will be revised," Arena stated firmly. "Prepare a communique to High Command. Inform them that Earth is not to be engaged militarily." Sora bowed her head, accepting the order. "As you command." The atmosphere shifted further, hope replacing fear. Arena turned to David once more. "It seems our encounter has altered the course of events." He smiled. "For the better, I hope." She returned the smile subtly. "I believe so." As the Valkyra began to regroup, preparations were made for formal discussions. Temporary communication channels were established between the Valkyra ship and Earth's leaders. Scientists and diplomats eagerly awaited the chance to engage with the alien visitors. The sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city. The day's events had changed everything. Humanity had not only made first contact with an advanced alien race, but had also earned their respect. Before returning to the Valoria, Arena spoke privately with David. "You have shown me that even the smallest voice can echo loudly." He nodded. And you've shown me that even the mightiest warriors can seek understanding over conquest. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Perhaps there is hope for a future where our peoples stand together. One step at a time, he replied. She extended her hand once more. Until we meet again, David Kane. He shook her hand warmly. Safe travels, General Arena. With that, she joined her warriors as they ascended the ramp back into their ship. The Valoria began to rise, its engines humming softly. The crowd watched in silence, a mix of relief and wonder on their faces. As the ship vanished into the sky, David stood among his fellow humans, a quiet hero who had changed the fate of his world, not with weapons but with courage and respect. The departure of the Valoria left the city in an eerie silence, as if the entire world was collectively holding its breath. The massive ship had ascended beyond the atmosphere, vanishing from sight, but the memory of the Valkyra's presence lingered. On the streets of New York, people slowly emerged from their hiding places, unsure of what to do now that the impossible encounter had ended. David Kane stood in the middle of the street, still feeling the weight of everything that had just transpired. He had faced down one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy and lived to tell the tale. More than that, he had earned her respect. The memory of Arena's violet eyes meeting his just before they parted lingered in his mind. She was no ordinary enemy. In fact, she wasn't an enemy at all anymore. Around him, military personnel and law enforcement officers moved quickly to secure the area. Sirens wailed in the distance, and helicopters hovered above, keeping watch. David could see groups of government officials and scientists already descending on the scene, eager to piece together what had just happened. But David knew that this was only the beginning. An officer approached him, looking dazed but composed. David Kane, sir. The President has requested an immediate briefing. You need to come with us. David nodded, though his mind was still spinning from the encounter. As he followed the officer to a waiting convoy, he caught one last glimpse of the sky, wondering if the Valkyra were still up there, watching. Hours later, David found himself standing in the Oval Office. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. The President of the United States, along with several top military officials and advisors, were seated around him, listening intently as David recounted every detail of his duel with General Arena. The air in the room was thick with tension. So you're telling me that these Valkyra decided not to invade because you won some kind of fight? One of the generals asked skeptically. It wasn't about winning, David replied calmly. It was about proving that Earth isn't as weak as they thought. Arena wasn't looking for a war. She was looking to test us, to see if we were worth her time. The President leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. And what do you believe? Do you think this General Arena can be trusted? David paused, considering the question carefully. Yes, he said finally. I do. She may be a warrior, but she's not reckless. She respects strength, and she respects those who stand up for themselves. If we approach them with respect and show them that we're willing to cooperate, I think we can avoid any conflict. A murmur rippled through the room as the advisors exchanged glances. The idea of negotiating with an alien race was both thrilling and terrifying. Earth had never been in a situation like this before. The President nodded, absorbing the information. And you think we should initiate formal diplomacy with these Valkyra? I think it's our best chance, David replied. They didn't come here to destroy us. If we handle this right, we might have an opportunity to form an alliance, one that could change the future of our world. The President sat back in his chair, deep in thought. Finally, he looked up. Very well, we'll proceed cautiously. I want our top diplomats working on this immediately. David, you've done an incredible service for your country and for the world. We'll need you to remain closely involved in these discussions. David nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what his role would be going forward. He had never imagined that one day he'd be negotiating peace with alien warriors. But the world had changed in a matter of hours. Nothing felt certain anymore. As the meeting adjourned, David walked out of the Oval Office, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. Outside the White House, The media frenzy was already in full swing. Reporters clamored for information, eager to hear every detail about the first confirmed encounter with extraterrestrial life. But David was too drained to pay them much attention. All he wanted was some quiet. Far above Earth, aboard the Valoria, General Arina stood before a holographic display, her eyes focused on the image of Earth below. She had returned to her command post, but her thoughts were still on the man she had faced earlier that day, David Kane. In all her years of conquest and battle, no one had ever made her question her assumptions the way he had. Sora approached from behind, her expression tense. "The High Command has received our report, General. They are perplexed by your decision to halt the invasion." Arina turned slowly, her face calm but firm. "Perplexed?" Sora nodded. "They do not understand why you would choose diplomacy over domination. Some members of the Council are concerned that Earth may not be worthy of our time." Arina's gaze hardened. "Then they are fools. Earth is more than it appears. I have seen something in its people, in their will to survive, their resilience. They are not like the other species we have encountered." Sora hesitated. "Do you truly believe they could be valuable allies?" Arina considered this for a moment. "Perhaps. They have strength that goes beyond physical power. If they can harness that strength, they may become a force worth aligning with. The Valkyra have ruled through conquest for centuries, but perhaps it is time we sought out partnerships instead of enemies." Sora's brow furrowed. "The Council may resist such ideas." "Let them," Arina said coolly. "I will not ignore what I have learned here. Earth has potential, and I intend to see what that potential holds." There was a long silence between them before Sora finally spoke again. "What of this human, David Kane? You seemed particularly interested in him." Arina's expression softened slightly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "He is different. He is a warrior in his own way, though not in the way we expected. He understands strength not as brute force, but as determination and adaptability. I believe he may be the key to understanding Earth." Sora looked skeptical, but did not argue. "What will our next move be? We will return to Thaldor and report to the Council. Then we will open formal channels with Earth's leaders. This is no longer a conquest, Sora. This is the beginning of something new." Days later, back on Earth, David Kane found himself standing in front of an international delegation. Representatives from the United Nations, heads of state, and scientists from every corner of the globe had gathered to discuss the Valkyra. David had been asked to speak, not as a soldier, but as a diplomat, the man who had faced down an alien general and brokered peace. "The world is watching," one of the diplomats said to him as they prepared for the session. "You've become a symbol of hope for billions." David smiled, though the weight of those words was not lost on him. "I didn't do this alone," he said quietly. "We all have a part to play in what comes next." As the session began, David stood before the assembly, feeling the eyes of the world upon him. The Valkyra had not returned since their departure, but communication channels had been established. The first steps toward diplomacy had been taken, and humanity now stood on the threshold of a new era, one filled with possibility, but also uncertainty. "The Valkyra are not our enemies," David began, his voice steady and clear. "They are warriors, yes, but they are also beings capable of reason and respect. They came here expecting to find weakness, but what they found was resilience, and because of that, we have an opportunity to forge a future not defined by fear, but by cooperation." The room was silent, every word hanging in the air. "As we move forward, we must remember that strength isn't just about power. It's about standing together, about finding common ground even when the odds seem insurmountable. The Valkyra have given us a chance, and it's up to us to make the most of it." Applause erupted from the assembly. David stepped back, the weight of the moment finally lifting from his shoulders. He had no way of knowing what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: Earth was no longer alone in the universe. As the applause continued, David allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. His eyes drifted upward, toward the sky, where he imagined the Valkyra, watching from their distant homeworld. He wondered if, somewhere, Arena was looking back at Earth with the same sense of curiosity and hope. Far beyond the stars, aboard the Valoria, General Arena stood on the command deck, gazing at a holographic image of Earth. She smiled faintly, her thoughts returning to the day she had met David Kane. "Until we meet again," she whispered softly. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Valkyra vessel shot forward into the infinite expanse of space, leaving Earth behind, but not forgotten.